Okay. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Inspire Show. This is a June edition. And before we get started, I just want to explain a little bit about how we work. The Inspire Show is part of a larger program called the Awakening Village. And the Awakening Village is really for people to help, change leaders, people who are working in communities, not-for-profit organizations, even families and so forth, to help them rise to their potential, to give them the skills, the support, the expertise, the tools, the know-how to help them become their best so that they can create a ripple effect amongst their communities and beyond of positive change. And so one aspect is the Inspire Show, where we interview change leaders from locally and from around the world. Today we have someone from London. She happens to be in London today, but often she's in different parts of the world. We also have something called the Awakening Cafe, which we meet on a regular basis through Zoom. And we also have a huge library on our website with all sorts of videos, posts, content to help you to whatever you might need in terms of whether it may be some consciousness, personal development, business skills, whatever you might need to help you to rise to that next level. And we also are consciously creating a network of people that will support each other and really be in service to help us all really thrive. And I just want to, I have to do a little bit of a promo here, is just to say that if you want to go to my website, on my homepage, there's some really amazing things happening. The summer is a great time to create, and it's also a slower time for a lot of people. So it's an opportunity for us to do some things. And for me, because it's slower, it also gives me a chance to give a great deals to entice people to come in and work with me in the summer. Because when things get busy again in the fall, won't have that opportunity. So one thing I'm really excited about is I'm doing a retreat in August with Sharon Cohen. Some of you know about that. And also something new that most of you are aware of yet. I'm doing, and this was inspired by Anne. I'm doing, and we can talk a lot about imagination and creativity. So I'm doing a creative camp for adults. And it's going to be Friday mornings for 5 weeks from beginning of July to the beginning of August, to come to my place, which is, I call the Soul Sanctuary. It's a beautiful space where we can first gather together as co-creatives who are wanting to bring our project out in the world, whether it be maybe you might be working on some new initiative in your business, could be even a book or art endeavor, whatever it might be that you really need to dedicate some time, and you benefit from being in an inspiring environment and with other people. And then also I've got private and online programs that are amazing deals right now, so check that out. But now what I'd like to do is really welcome Anne. Anne and I met at the Wisdom Conference a year and a half ago. And actually Julie was there as well at the same table, so you might recognize her as well. And so Anne is an amazing creative spirit. So I'm just going to do a little reading, if you don't mind, for a second, so I don't go off topic here. Anne brings cutting-edge intuitive techniques together with 30 plus years of innovative and technology as a technology professional to deliver end results that appear improbable, if not impossible. She is passionate about purposeful application of imagination. And although she could be defined as a coach, a teacher, a writer, a speaker, she's ultimately what she calls herself an imagination technologist. I love, she talks about going from information technologist to imagination technologist. So she hosts the Wiz Biz, which is her mentoring program that brings heart and soul of entrepreneurs into business. And also, hopefully she'll be able to elaborate on that. And this one, which she calls the LLAB, which is a creative pop-up, a project fostering co-living, co-working in inspiring destinations to support people to accelerate their creations. So this is where I got my idea for the creative camp in the summer. And also Walk the Camino, and her story has recently been published in My Camino Walk, co-published with a number of other authors. And she lives in various places. She's a traveling Wilbury. She lives right now in the UK and Europe, and also I caught her earlier this month in Australia, and she's also in the US. So I'm just going to stop sharing here and welcome Anne. Thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate you coming in. It's about just after 5 there, right, in London?
Yes, it is.
And we can actually see some sun coming through. Isn't that awesome? You don't see that too much. Anyway, so, Anne, I just want to start by, if you could just tell us a little bit about your journey from, as you call it, IT to IT, information technologist to imagination technologist.
Yeah, lovely. Thanks, Leanne. It's lovely to be here and lovely to be in conversation.
Mm-hmm.
One of my favorite things. Um, but so I started off my career way back in the 70s and didn't know what I wanted to do. And there was a local college offering people money to learn about computers. And my father quite wisely told me to go and do it because I was going to get paid. So I thought, well, at least I'm going to go and do something and earn a bit of money. And so I ended up on a trajectory which took me into coding and design and the whole IT world. I created a lot of freedom for myself. I had my own business since the early 90s. I used to work intensely on projects and then go away and travel. But by the time I got to my mid-40s, I was sort of had that question about what else is there? There's got to be more to life. And a real sense, I think it's Stephen Covey that talked about this, about climbing a ladder and finding yourself up against the wrong wall. And I just thought, oh my gosh, yeah, I feel like I've got to the top of this ladder. I don't really want to go into business. I don't want to really play in the corporate workspace other than being a bit of a maverick and a bit of a devil's advocate. So personally, I just started looking at my skills. I started doing some personal development work, and I found somebody who was basically, well, actually what I found was that I did some profiling work which suggested that I was intuitive rather than rational. I was working in a very rational world. And then subsequently, as magic happens, I'm sure you ladies have these magical things that happen, I got an email saying, do you want to master your intuition? And I thought, oh, well, this sounds like for me. So I met the guy who was doing these intuition courses was actually an ex-Oracle salesman. So he came from my world. And I thought, well, if he's okay if he's come from my world. But he introduced me to, this work, which is about storytelling. It's actually about making it up, which, part of what it is about making it up, which is very challenging to my rational mind. But I decided to throw myself full in. So I continued working in technology for about 4 years, but progressively got more involved in this work and started coaching people. Until I got to a point where I realized that there was a big difference between, what I really wanted to do and what I was doing. And I did my last IT contract in 2011, I think. And I just realized, I think it's interesting because my job title at that stage generally was transformation lead or transformation manager. For those of you in the corporate workspace, it's about changing systems and about change management. And, basically what it boils down to is getting rid of people and making companies more efficient and more productive using technology. And I guess part of my journey was realizing that the transformation that I was interested in was the personal transformation. And that's the journey I went on myself. That was, at that point, I realized there was more to me. And I realized if my love of imagination and making it up meant that there was more for me, then there's more for others. Yeah. I thought I'd reached the limit of what I could do. I had a master's in anthropology. I had a degree in marketing. I had a degree in science. But this has just opened up my whole world. The imagination aspect is what I love. It's imagination and intuition. I mean, there is a distinction between them. But to me, imagination is what it's about. And to me, imagination is a language, and it's unique to all of us. And part of what I guess the calling is to learn our own language, learn our own language of imagination, because it comes to all of us differently. And one of my teachers once said that God said to the rational mind, okay, you've got two choices. You've got a choice about communicating. Do you want to communicate through thoughts and feelings, or do you want to communicate through symbols? And the rational mind said, okay, I'll have thoughts and feelings. And God said to the intuitive mind, okay, you've got symbols. So, I love that idea that, when we in our thoughts and feelings, it's all coming from our rational perception of life. And what we have are glimpses and images and, our imagination turns up and just our hyper awareness, just hearing a clock tick or getting a fragment of a song or, feeling a tingle in our little finger. Yeah. And to me, they're all symbols. And so it's like, what does that symbol mean? What's obvious about that symbol? And so to me, it's a language. And because it's a language that's always evolving and changing and is different for every person, then it means that, when I work in that space, my life is very dynamic.
So tell me a little bit about how you work with that right now with your clients and what you're doing as an imagination technologist.
Yeah, absolutely. It's great, Leanne, because it's a great question because, imagination in and of itself, I think we all have, we may think that we don't have it, but, we understand that what it is. It's sort of a visual sense of the world. It's this other information. Now, what I get is that without any structure, without any clarity, when we get this information, we don't really know what to do with it, So you might meet somebody and you might get an image of, let's say, somebody behind prison bars, but I don't know what this is about. I don't know why I've got this information. I don't know, is it of any use to me? So the rational mind just goes, oh, we'll throw that away. We don't know what that's about. I'm not going to suddenly talk to somebody and say, oh, I've got this image of you. What does it mean about you? But the technology aspect for me is actually creating a framework within which to work. And so that framework does originate from a guy who's based down in Vermont, a guy called Robert Fritz, who developed structural dynamics. Now, Robert Fritz doesn't really bring any imagination or intuition into his work, but as a structural person, somebody who understands the structure of consciousness, I think his work is awesome. And I'd highly recommend his book written in 1988, which is The Path of Least Resistance. Because really what he does is he talks about that nothing is personal, everything is structural. So, we spend a lot of our life kind of going, oh, I can't lose weight. There's something wrong with me. Or, I can't make the money I want to make. I mustn't be getting things right. I'm not good enough yet. And he talks about it's not personal. He goes, it's just structural. It's just the way your consciousness is configured.
Very interesting. And so I understand that you work a lot with startups and business owners and helping them create their vision. So can you explain a little bit? And you mentioned actually before the show, if I can actually see if I can quote, I really love the way you said it. You're passionate about bringing mindfulness, awareness, creativity, and intuition into business and into organizations. So why do you think that's important? Bringing, first of all, imagination, intuition, and you can expand if you want beyond that to mindfulness and awakening. I think in some way they're all kind of connected, right? But why is it important, imagination and intuition into business right now?
Well, I think there's a whole beautiful world available to us to create that we can't see unless we're looking through the lenses of imagination. But also, the other way of looking at this, Leanne, is that, business is a very large chunk of our lives. Yeah, it's a very large chunk of our, daily life, but it's also a very large chunk of a lot of people's lives, even if you're not in business, but you're married to somebody who has a business or is in business or has a job, or your kids that you're educating and putting them through school and they're going to go into business. It's a bit like the elephant in the living room. I go, and to me, business is a structure. That's all it is. It's a structure that we all recognize that we can work with. So we understand how business works. Somebody sells a product, they market it, you go and buy it and you get money for it. And if something goes wrong with it, there's customer services. So to me, it's just a structure. Yeah. But without imagination in it, it can be dry. A lot of people, I'm not saying people don't love their work, but, we meet people, I meet people who go, there's got to be more to life than this, than my business, than being in this business. And by bringing imagination into business, I think there's a potential to completely transform businesses and transform people in businesses. And I think the idea of everybody, bringing the best of who they are, which is really, what imagination starts to take you to. It takes you to your truth and what you truly want to do. Then, businesses become wonderful synergistic arrangements which create much bigger outcomes than I think are possible through the rational thinking, the rational logical thinking. Yeah, and you know, and I think in a lot of cases, business is just a process, and it's very much focused on creating money. And I think it's just a tiny proportion of the possibility and the potential.
Oh, very nice. So so many questions come up, and I'm kind of popcorning here because I hadn't have thought of some of these things before. But can you describe a little bit about the difference, or how you see mindfulness, which is becoming more and more important, and open, business is becoming more open and accepting mindfulness in organizations. And my feel is that the imagination intuition is that next step. But what, if you were to tell people, what would be the difference between mindfulness and imagination and tapping into your intuition?
Yeah. Well, I think you're right, Leanne. I think there's two parts to the journey that we can choose to go on. And I think the first thing, the mindfulness is about listening to that inner voice. Yeah. The mindfulness is about going beneath the surface noise of your thoughts and feelings. So to me, mindfulness is about turning down the volume of, you know, your thoughts and feelings so that you can hear or see or receive the information that's available to you. And there is a space that people learn about when they learn to be mindful. Yeah. Now, I think, you know, a lot of the motivation in business is to bring mindfulness in to stop people being stressed. It isn't actually about opening them up to becoming creative, but that's what happens. You know, that's the potential then, is to open people up to become creative. And so for me, you know, you've got the opportunity then to go, okay, so you've now learned to be mindful. You've learned to be aware. You can tell the difference between your thoughts, your feelings, your reactions, having your buttons pressed, and just being in what's true, and just being in your truth.
Sounds like a London cabbie or something.
I mean, I'm not in a very busy part of London, but I have to say there's been nothing but ambulances and sirens all day. So I feel like I'm in New York.
Yeah.
But, so I think when you created that space, then potentially people receive information, you know, and you can then say, what is it you want to create? And so when I talked about the structural dynamic work, I work with people to establish end results or goals, if you like, that are important to them. So a lot of traditional life coaching does that from a rational space. And one of my major problems when I started looking into what I wanted to do and what I wanted to be was people would ask me, what did I love? And I couldn't answer that question. Me personally, my personality type, I've learned a lot about myself, is I cannot answer that question. You know, I just go, my story is, you can't have what you love. You're not allowed to have what you love. So we'll just block it out. So imagination informs me, though. When I'm in my imagination, I see the ocean, I see the sun, I you know, see myself flying around the world, I see myself talking on stage, I see myself working with people to create awesome businesses, I see a community of friends, I see myself co-working and co-living and co-sharing with people, I see myself in an awesome relationship. You know, it's like that's what I'm about. Yeah, my imagination tells me, and it's not disputable.
Lovely. That's really beautiful. And can I ask you another question, is about, well, there's two. One Doris just mentioned is about the difference between imagination and intuition. And that kind of relates to a question that I had, which is, some people will, you know, will almost have when we were growing up, well, that's just your imagination. So we discount it as not real. And somehow then the idea of intuition, maybe our gut reaction, maybe some people, they're logic-minded people will say, okay, I get that idea, gut reaction. So I guess the two-part question, what would you say to people who say, it's just my imagination, it's not real? And then how would you explain the difference between imagination and intuition? And then maybe they're two different questions and they're locked together.
You know, it's a very good question. And, you know, I have actually thought, wow, I should actually sit down and work out what the difference is. Not even work out what it is, but just, you know, research into it. But the reality is, I don't know what the difference is right now in this space. What I get is it's a rational distraction to go down that path and try and work out. Because intuitively, we all get it, right? I get that we get it, yeah? And maybe they're interchangeable. It reminds me of when I did my anthropology degree at one point, I did an essay on what was the difference between culture and I can't even remember what it was now, but these two words that were completely different. And what I realized is that I could either do an essay that said they were different, or I could do an essay to say that said they were the same.
Interesting.
There's enough evidence out there, right?
Yeah.
So how I would, so I would tend to use them interchangeably, yeah. But if I want to make a distinction between imagination and intuition, it's like, to me, imagination is a language. So somebody can say, you know, I've received, you know, I see myself, you know, flying around the world, you know, being a pilot or something, and that's just my imagination. It's not real. Well, you know, that's true. It's not real, but it is a symbolic piece of information that they've got. So, you know, if somebody was to say that to me, I would say, well, is that what you'd love? Would you like to be a pilot flying around the world? Because that's something we can create. We can create that, and we create that. So the imagination aspect is almost the language of it, and then the intuition is where we go to get it. Yeah, almost like intuition is the space we go into. It's an intuitive space, and it comes. You know, what I would say is it comes directly from our soul. Yeah, so I think they're quite interchangeable. I think we could go down the route of making a distinction. I'm sure if I looked up in a dictionary, there would be a distinction between them. But to me, it's a bit like, you know, thoughts and feelings. Thoughts and feelings are interchangeable. Like, we do know that they're different, but I can guarantee you when I do some work, I actually ask people what their thoughts are, and I ask them what their feelings are. And when I ask them what their thoughts are, they tell me feelings. And when I ask them what their feelings are, they tell me thoughts. So,
we're complex beings, aren't we? It is amazing. Yeah. And one of the reasons it kind of hits to me is that somehow I get a sense, and you may correct me here, is that intuition is right now in our day and age kind of more acceptable than imagination.
Yeah.
We kind of see intuition is real somehow. We don't quite understand it, maybe because we're animals and we understand intuition of animals or something, but imagination is what kids did. It's not real. So that's kind of what I was trying to get at there is, and how do you deal with that if you see that myth or that perspective, how do you deal with it with your clients?
Well, you know, you're right. You've made a very good point. Like, intuition is a more acceptable sixth sense. If you like.
Yeah.
It's snuck into our lexicon. It's okay to have intuition, you know. It's okay to have gut feel. If I was dealing with it, I mean, I do use the term imagination technology, and I like to call myself an imagination technologist. And you know, but it's a bit like, for me, it's like what serves, you know. I'm very, it's interesting. I remember, you know, sharing with somebody in a course, I stood up and said, look, we're going to step into this, and we're going to make up, you know, what you'd love, what your vision is, what your freedom means. And this guy, very rational guy, says, well, you know, how do you know if that's true? And I said, I actually don't know if it's true. Yeah. But what I know is that actually, to step into a space and go, this is my freedom space. Well, what did I get here? Oh, I've got, you know, a flag. I've got a beach. I've got an ocean. I've got, you know, a dog. I go, okay, so what does that mean to you? And I've done this in a business context. I specifically started off a course recently where I got everybody to step into a circle that represented their freedom. And just to write down what it represented. And in this business room, we had people talking about being with their family, having a run on the beach, you know, taking their dog for a walk. You know, and everyone's there going, wow, that just makes me feel so open, so expansive, and it really opened up the day for us because, you know, people are being vulnerable and real with each other, you know. And so, you know, I'm more about what serves and about playing the game, really. So I will be.
That's cool. So Julie has a question. She said, and if we need more clarification, maybe you can come on, Julie. But Julie said, how do you get past the initial resistance? Can you give an example of a larger goal achieved through imagination and resulting kind of synergy? I don't know if you have an example of that, but sometimes I guess we don't trust our imagination and intuition, and there's a resistance there. I think that's what you're saying, Julie. You can clarify for sure if there's any more here. Sorry.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a very good question. And Plato talks about the implacable force, you know, the implacable force that keeps us from what we love. And also, I think acknowledging resistance is part of getting over it. And I use the premise that we've got two parts to ourselves. We've got our story or our ego, which is designed to keep us separate. And then we've got our creative spirit, which is all about being connected. And our ego is like a bouncer on a nightclub, and that's its job. It's to keep us separate all the time. And so resistance is always about separation. And but I do in my programs and in the work that I do, we look at this. I mean, I have a module which is sort of basically over 3 or 4 months, we basically look at awareness, even with somebody who's done mindfulness training. And we actually look at this because there's a shared language and there's a shared understanding. So, and we're able to actually use our imagination and intuition to see what resistance is there. But, the bottom line is about how do you get past it is a choice. It's just you just choose to hire. You choose what it is you want. If I give an example of that, which is in my collab, actually is quite a good example of that for me. So I have a vision of living in different countries. I have a vision of living by the sea. I've got a vision of working.
Sounds familiar,
Julie. Sorry? Sounds familiar, yeah. I have a vision of working with people. It's not like living on my own. When I'm in that space, I go, no, I'm with people who are creating. I'm in these beautiful remote locations, but we're creating stuff in the world. And, my rational mind goes, oh, okay, so in the future, I'm going to get rich, I'm going to win the lottery, and I'm going to buy land in Costa Rica and buy land in Antigua and buy land in Australia, and I'm going to build these wonderful retreats, and I'm going to be a bit like Richard Branson with 3 Necker Islands. So, that's my vision. I can feel the energy of it, but my rational mind has immediately gone into, you're going to have to win the lottery, it's going to have to look like this, it's a long, long way away. Yeah. And last year I have a client who's doing some of this work in corporates, and he had a prototype workshop, and I went along to co-facilitate, and he said, I'd like you to bring a problem, because we're going to address the problem. So I said, well, my problem is I've got this big vision and, which is miles away. But anyhow, I said, it's a vision. It creates tension for me. I don't know how to create it. And I think the best thing I can do is just dream about it. Yeah. And we in the group of 8 people, all of them actually were reasonably new to awareness work. And when I shared what my problem was, I identified it as a marketing and, from a business context, as being a marketing problem and a product problem. That I didn't have a product, and I didn't have any money, and I didn't have any marketing. And I stood into the circle, into the space that we created. And every single one of those people told me it was an action problem. I wasn't taking action. And I sat there going, well, how can I take action because I don't have money? And all that tension, all that resistance, all that psychological tension comes up because these people are asking me to take action on a vision that's like massive, it's huge. And we kept just going around the room, and because I really get this work, I choose to receive the wisdom that's being shared with me. Yeah, and I choose that everybody there they're not trying to wind me up. They're trying to serve me. And that's the space that's been held. So, and the more they spoke, the more I went, I just have to go and rent a house. It's just about renting a house. And that was, I think, at the beginning of December last year. And renting a house by the sea, even off season in the UK, is about 3 times the price of what I pay for my mortgage in London. But I started telling people I was going to rent a house. And I think it was the 31st of December, I found a house overlooking the ocean. I actually got onto the owners and I managed to get a good deal. So it was only twice what I was paying in London. And 3 days later, I had 9 people turn up, and we ran a workshop, and they stayed with me, and I stayed in the whole place for a month. And I had, I had people coming up and down for the space of the month. So I've now heard of reality.
Hold on, just 1 second. And do you hear the feedback? Ooh, are you guys hearing it? Or is it just me? Oh boy.
What is it then?
I don't know I think it's something on the line. Hold on 1 second. Here we're back. Frog is gone, I think. You can hear me okay. So tell us a little bit. So that's really amazing, your story about that first collab, you call it, and the collab stands for Creative Laboratory. Is that what it is?
Yeah, collaboration.
Collaboration, creative.
Collaboration through co-living and co-working and holding a space for end results. So for me, it was about people coming and saying, right, I want to spend a week or a whole month in this space, and I want to, write my book, or I want to work on my business programs, or I'd like to paint pictures, or, I'd like to run one of my, test run one of my workshops here. And so my only condition really was that people were choosing an end result, that they had something that they were choosing to come and create. And nearly everybody who came was connected to a coach that I know. So most people were in coaching structures, but my offer was to coach people if they wanted it. And one of the people who did come is now in my Wiz Biz business mentoring program.
How amazing is that? So just tell us a little bit of how it was actually structured. So you've got the place, and then you have 9 people come. You've got a month there. How do they work? Just to give us kind of visualize what it's like, because you've told it to me, and I just think it's amazing idea.
Well, it was basically a space. The house itself slept 6, but we had some people stayed with somebody else. When we had and the 9 people came over the whole month. I think the first workshop we ran had 6 people, and there was a second workshop with 4 people. But then other people came over the space of the month, and some of them came twice. So people basically just said, right, I want to come for 3 days. I said if there's a room or if there's a bed. I came up with a price. They paid the price. I looked after the food. So basically I made arrangements to have, whatever food was there for breakfast and lunch. And there was a shared living space, and basically we kind of made that space between 10 to 4 was a workspace. And then in the evenings we shared meals, we cooked meals together, or we went out and we watched movies. And yeah, we just operated like a group of people sharing a house together, really.
Wow. So how did it end? What were some of the kind of key results for you?
Well, the results for me was actually this Friday we're launching a new training program, a 12-month training program. That was an outcome that was created in that space. Also On a Mission, which is a collaboration of coaches, which I'm part of, that was created in that space. One of the other guys has, finished a book that he was writing. We had another lady who came and worked on a book that she's creating. We had another woman there who came and did her first set of paintings and pictures. Personally, I did a juice fast. I got a personal trainer. I hung out with friends who lived down there. One of the other coaches who lives nearby ran a nature walk, went out, he's a bird lover and loves nature, and we had a nature walk. So
imagine there's some personal kind of things that happen too, relationships, maybe some transformation, things that happen as well.
Yeah, well, everybody stayed longer. That was one of the things that, for me, like one of my realizations over the time I've been doing this work is that actually when you live imaginatively and intuitively, your environment doesn't really matter. Like, when you're powerful, you can create from any circumstances. Yeah. When you're able to master yourself, it doesn't matter whether, you haven't got a place to stay, or, your partner's upset with you. Part of mastery is to be able to do that. But also there are structures that serve us, that serve our hearts. And for me, living in London isn't a structure that serves my heart any longer. I absolutely love the ocean. I like mountains. I like, trees. I like forests, but I love the ocean. The ocean to me is a kind of represents somehow expansiveness of imagination. And I'm always inspired in that space. So, the biggest thing for me was creating a house by the ocean for like a whole month. I absolutely loved being in Cornwall. Every single morning I woke up and I loved it. And I was there for a little bit on my own. There was about a week when there was nobody booked in. And I was doing a lot of work. I was coaching work. I was developing programs. I was on my own. But all I had to do was look out at the ocean. But, it was a wonderful, wonderful structure for me. And it was a great affirmation. Like it was also, I created an end result that, the end result's not over. CoLab is about the bigger vision.
Yes. Yeah.
But just taking that first step and creating something that was real and tangible has put me in a space of going, I've got a new current reality now, and there's new learnings now.
And without a lot of risk. right? That's one of the key things, because a lot of times people think about business and they're creating all these structures and they're investing a lot of money and time, and there's a lot of risk. And then what happens when you have something with a lot of risk? You start to feel, and then guess what happens to creativity? It gets pushed down, right? That's such a great example. It's so interesting because I'm actually have just recently got this kind of big vision, similar feeling that you have of what I want to create. I mean, we've talked a little bit about it. I've spoken to some of the ladies online here too, and it's like, okay, how do I do this and how do I put it together? But I like that idea. It's taking that first step, and it doesn't have to be nearly as big as the overall. It's just that step, and when you see what works and what doesn't work. It's really phenomenal. So what is your other ideas for the collab? Are there more coming up? I know you had one in New Zealand in April, which I would have loved to go to, but I couldn't get away for that long. But what other ones are you doing? Are you still planning?
Well, the collab is actually, I think it's changing shape.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's one of the things to really be aware of, that you talk about taking the next step, Leanne, just go back to that. The next step isn't always obvious. Like it wasn't obvious to me, which is why our learning what our imagination and our intuition is telling us is important, or learning to receive it from other people. Yeah, so I was in that circle and I could not see that. I could not see that as an obvious next step. I was completely blind to it. So, but what's happened is my reality has changed. So because my reality has changed, it's a bit like, I don't know Canada very well, but, it's a bit like you're in Montreal and you want to get to Quebec and you drive halfway there. Well, your reality is different. You go from Montreal to Toronto and suddenly there's a different route to get to your vision. So my vision is the same, but it's almost like intuitively I get a sense of there's different priorities. Yeah. So part of what's emerging for me is to create a collab in Portugal. There's a wonderful conference that I came across called the House of Beautiful Business.
What's it called? Sorry?
House of Beautiful Business.
Oh, nice. Okay.
It's run by a guy called Tim Liebrecht, I think is his name. I can send you the details later, but he's written a book called The Business Romantic, and he is talking about romance in business, very similar kind of thing that I'm talking about. And he set up this conference in Lisbon, which is all about discussing this and, diving into it. And I proposed to do a workshop on imagination technology there, but that's in Lisbon for a week at the beginning of November. And also with my collaboration of coaches, we've got a 2-day retreat. So I'm looking at renting a house in Lisbon for a month. And so that's pretty clear. Potentially, I'm also looking at renting a place for a whole year in Cornwall. So rather than making it pop up, there's different entity emerging. New Zealand.
When is Lisbon, by the way? What month is that?
November.
November. Okay.
Yeah. Probably end of October to end of November. Okay. And that House of Beautiful Business, I think, is on from the 3rd to the 8th or something.
Okay, cool. And Julie had another question here. I'm not sure I completely understand. She says, how do you get business people to realize they could benefit from your insights? When you're talking insights, Julie, do you mean how imagination and intuition is important? What do you mean by her insights?
Well, people tend to assume they know what imagination is when they just hear the word, and they each have their own connotations, their own language. But it could be an outdated language or a very juvenile language attached to it, not seeing the other possibilities. So it seems to me one of the challenges would be to market your services. Once you're in the door, you immediately show what you're able to do for them. But how do you get across the traditional thresholds?
Great question.
It is a good question. I think, with there's two questions for me there, or there's two answers that come up. One is about, the structurally how I work, So how I work is there's a structure, there's a technology, and that's a really important part of it, yeah? So, and from a business point of view, people get that. They get structure, they get technology, they get process. So, I talk to them about using imagination, but within a structure. And that structure is not dissimilar to how I learned about a technology. My very first probably year learning about technology, the principle was that you looked at the output to decide what the inputs were. You looked at the vision, you looked at the end result, and it's the same thing. You look at the end result, but generally people look at the problem, right? So it's the same structure. So when I talk to people about that business structure, they actually get it. We just don't use it. So structurally, when I talk to people, I'm not just talking to them about imagination. I'm talking to them about, using a technology and using a structure within which we access imagination. Yeah. So that's the first thing. The second thing is I haven't actually done what you're asking, really. I mean, I don't actively market. I do word of mouth marketing at the moment. I worked for 3 years with another person who trained with me to set up a business here, an events and training business, which was very successful, and that changed from a community of 2 or 3 people to a community of over 2,000 people who have learned how to use this kind of technology. I'm no longer supporting that business. We took it to, I think it's £5.5 million turnover or something. So, I've worked in business and we've created in that space. And for me personally, it's how I'm talking to people at the moment. I talk to people. I don't actively market. I don't have, a funnel. I don't have videos. I would love to, and that is where I'm moving to. But, I spoke to a guy on the plane flying from Australia to Singapore. And in that conversation, I said, look, I hear you've got a problem in your business, because that's all he could talk about. And I said, and he said, and my coach told me I created the problem. And I said, well, I don't mean to upset you, but he's right. But what he hasn't done is shown you how you've created that problem. He hasn't shown you what part of your consciousness that's come from. I said, and if you want to look at that, and once we can identify that, then it's very easy for us to shift to the vision of what you want. So I went into his business and did a session, and got an email this morning from him just saying, I can't believe how that's impacted me. And he's just recruited 2 people that before our conversation he didn't believe he could recruit, but after our conversation he realized they were essential to his vision. So at the moment I'm dealing with it on a one-on-one basis, Julie, and I just get that's a lot of how I work is about doing what's true in the moment. Like I get that when we step into business space, and I do have a colleague at the moment who tends to get very focused on the business, very focused on, right, you're a coach, let's make you a business, let's get your invitational funnel up, your marketing this up. You've got to do what's true. So I look at all of these structures that we have out there, which are wonderful structures, yeah, but there is no cookie cutter formula. We're all different, yeah. So if I step into the vision of my business, I mean, at the moment when I step into the vision of my business, I get to develop programs. So I've changed my coaching from a 2-session a month structure to we're now going to work on outcomes, and I'm going to work on modules where I will work with you intensely until we get the outcome. And you'll pay, X amount of money per month for that. And so I'm changing my programs. I'm writing them out, which I've got lots of resistance to doing. I've got lots of resistance I'm aware of. But I'm also part of this awesome coaching program that we're launching. So I'm doing stuff despite myself. Yeah.
I love it. And I love, maybe in 6 months or so when you've got some of this outcome oriented type of module approach, I'd love to hear more about that. I think that's pretty cutting edge. And I think there's something really important kind of emerging from that. If I could just get like maybe a little bit more clarity about how you would take, and you don't have to give this guy's example, but how you'd see someone has a resistance in their consciousness and how you'd use imagination to tap into that so they can see that, just because maybe we could use it on ourselves as well.
Oh, well, we do. I mean, and in the training that I did, I learned a very easy structure. In fact, there's a free download on my website.
Okay.
Which actually,
your website is
www.crossingfrontiers.co.uk. So I'll just...
Yeah, we'll put that. I'll also put it on there, but it's just good that you have that. Okay.
So there's a free download there, which is not, particularly, it's not all polished or anything, but it's literally, I think it's less than 5 minutes. If you've got a problem, if you go through that and answer the questions, you don't have to write them down. You can just answer them in your mind. If you follow the questions and follow the guidance, you'll see how that works. So basically what I do is I use a set of questions that specifically target your thoughts, You know, what are your thoughts? What are your feelings? Yeah. Beneath thoughts and feelings are definitions, and beneath definitions there's what I call assumptions. And what happens is we all, you know, our story or our ego or whatever we want to call it is built up of a set of a unique combination of assumptions that we have that are very specific to us. So, you know, people are aware of beliefs and can say, well, I'm not good enough or I'm powerless. They can have that concept, but in your consciousness, there will be a version of that, which will be, you know, something like, you know, I'm not able to have what I want because I'm not good enough, you know, or I'm powerless because I haven't got permission, you know, or there's something about me that needs to be fixed. So until I fix that. So there'll be something in there that you know, and people see it, you know, it's like, wow. I talked to a coach recently and we went through the top level, and at his thoughts level, he goes, I don't need to be fixed because I'm a coach and I know that it's about my consciousness and I don't need to be fixed. And we got down to the underlying assumption level and he just went, wow, he said, I believe I need to be fixed, don't I? Yeah. And because
in some way, don't we all, I guess?
Yeah, but using something that's got charge for you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So what I'm very interested in is the applied imagination and applying it in your life now, not so much the theory of it. So by him taking himself through this challenge, which was about how he expands his business, he realized that he felt he needed to be fixed. And so because he felt he needed to be fixed, the reality actually, the truth with this guy was actually going for a diagnosis to a psychiatrist. And he was very conscious and aware. He just goes, I'm going to go and get this diagnosis, and this guy's going to tell me I'm dyslexic, and and with them we're going to fix my dyslexia. But when we kind of went, wow, that's what's going on. You know, my invitation to people is like, you know, you're pure creative spirit. You're complete, you're whole. So that's another part of you. So let's step into that part of you, and let's let go of that assumption. Just, you know, we're in the imagination place. We can let go of that assumption now. Yeah. And then I'll invite people just to be with that, and just, you know, a little bit of mindfulness, a little bit to bring them into that space. And then I'll say, what would you love? And people go, oh, this is what I want. You know, and then I'll ask them, you know, well, what's that feel like? And how do you define yourself in here? And now that you're in that energy, what does that compel you to do? And people will say, wow, all I need to do is pick up the phone and say, I'm sorry. Or, you know, all I need to do is, and with that guy in particular, as an example, when he stood in, he just realized, he said, the only thing I care about right now are my kids, my wife, and my community. And yet my ego is trying to build my business. And he said, but when I'm in this space, I just need to make my community and my family my business. They're the people I want to work with. I don't want to go and work with people in Sydney. I want to work with people who are local. I'm going to organize my next family holiday and have all my clients come and bring their kids with them.
Wow, amazing.
Yeah. We're going to go skiing together as a group, you know, and his big complaint was, I need more business because I can't afford to go on a skiing holiday. Go to teach them, and suddenly he's going, wow, I can roll this into my business.
Amazing. Very cool. That's a great example. Thank you very much for sharing. Is there anything that I haven't asked or we haven't asked that you'd like to share? Is there anything that maybe a place where we can, you've mentioned where we can contact you. Hopefully you'll be able to share with us on the Awakening Village when you have a collab coming up, so some people will be able to see that. But is there anything else that you wanted to mention? And also, just for the people that are online here, if there's any other questions that you wanted to ask, because we're just coming up to the close to the end. It's been an amazing conversation with you, and I really appreciate that. But yeah, is there anything else you're working on? Anything else you'd like to add here?
Well, I'd love to say, Leanne, thank you for reaching out. You know, I think it's awesome. I think, you know, what wisdom taught me last year is that there isn't a way. You know, I've kind of learned my stuff through a particular structure, which I love. You know, it really works for me. But what I learned in wisdom is that there's all sorts of different ways to coming to the same place. Yeah. Mm. And I love what you were doing with your group and with your Awakening Village, and it's all the same stuff. And what I get is, it's great to know that we're all moving towards the same end result, and we're all moving, you know, to operating from, you know, to our highest good, and in service to, you know, a beautiful new world, if you like. Mm. But, you know, the only thing that I don't know if I mentioned this to you, but my Wiz Biz program, and I just mentioned this because, you know, we are talking about here people with businesses. And one of the things I did when I first set up Wiz Biz was to actually look at where the definition of business came from. And I don't know if I shared this with you, but it comes from the old English word to mean anxiety.
There, Doris is really understanding it now. Every time she's at works with trying to improve consciousness of parents, and she says, "I never want to call it a business. I hate the word business."
Exactly. Now, and in Spanish, the word, and I love this even more actually, because in Spanish it's negocios, is the word for business, and that comes from the Latin to mean neg, not, otium, and otium is pleasure. So we're working like, and that's another reason why I like being in business. I like the infiltration of it. I like knowing that now that I know what the subtext is, I don't have to buy into it. But when we're unconscious, we buy into it, right? So I'll just share that because it's changed. My group, we now go, okay, business is just a structure. We're just going to use it. Yeah. We're not going to buy into the anxiety of it. We're not going to buy into that it's not pleasurable. We're just going to go, what does our heart want to create? How do we want to share it with people? Okay, right. Let's do a program. Let's, do talks. Let's do, So I want to share that because, business is laden with a lot of, unconscious stuff. There's just unconscious definitions and unconscious expectations, and I don't believe it has to be like that. And we're the whole group of women here, and I think it's time for the feminine energy, the intuitive energy, to actually turn up more in business.
Mm-hmm. And that would be another great topic that we need to talk another time. But I love the way you ended that. That is just very, very powerful. And Julie has her hand up. She has one more question. If anyone else we can take. But that's awesome. Thank you, Julie.
My quick question is about self-valuing and how that limits potential imagination and creativity. To what extent is that a factor in terms of how we define our language of imagination?
So I guess there's a couple of different elements for that as well to me, Julie. So when we talk about self-valuing, and I don't know what you mean about this, but, it's things like self-worth. Is that what you're talking about, self-worth and stuff? So to me, it goes back to this premise that there's two aspects to us. There's a part of us that thinks we're not lovable, we don't belong, we're not good enough, whatever. And so in that space, we're incomplete. Yeah, in that space, there's something about us that has to be fixed. And I also work with the idea that that's really what our ego is trying to do all the time. Our ego is trying to resolve that. It creates a tension in our consciousness, and that it's sort of running like a background program all the time. So even when you go into a shop to buy something, it plays out. Yeah, it can play out in the smallest things. And you go, why did I just bite that man's head off? He didn't do anything. But it serves your ego, because you go, okay, so now I feel bad, and now I'm not a good person. So that just proves that I'm not lovable. So in that space, that's what's happening all the time. Yeah. In this other space, the divine space, that those concepts don't exist, right? So to me, and again, this is interesting with the work that I've been doing, is that it's not about fixing the ego. The ego is your vehicle that gives you an experience of separation in life. Yeah. And it's a bit like complaining that you've got a Prius and you really want a Golf. Yeah. And then you spend your whole life kind of going, why did I get a Prius? And why did I not get a Golf? Or why did I not get a Mercedes? I don't get over that and just move into that other space where, you are complete, you are whole. It's not relevant. It's not relevant, actually. Yeah. So there isn't a sense of worth. And when you're in that space, and there is a choice, like one of the things, I use the word choice, but I also talk about service. So, it's important to know that when I'm working with people, that we're choosing to be of service to their highest good, and that they make that choice for themselves, and I make that choice, and I make that explicit when I'm doing coaching sessions. Yeah. And then we step into imagination. And part of the challenge for people can be they step into a vision and they get something that's not good. They go, oh, wow, that's not good. I got I had in fact, a man this morning said, I stepped into the vision and I was so timid and I felt so afraid. And so that's not good. And I said, I just get that you feel the fear and do it anyway. And that's in your divine self. You go, wow, the shit going down, excuse my language. And it makes me afraid. But that's not who I really am. I'm this other person. So, And does that sort of answer your question?
Mm-hmm. Except how do you then exist with the dichotomy between the two?
This is the beautiful paradox of the life that we live in. It's mastery, really. To me, it's about being able to be masterful. But, you know, in terms of stepping into, you know, what's a very important aspect of when you put people in that other space and you put people in the vision, I always say to them, now look back at current reality, which potentially we've looked at imaginatively. And I go, so you see yourself in Montreal and you can see that, your vision is to be in Montreal, but you're in Quebec. And what's the obvious action? So I'll always say to people, what's the obvious action? You know, you've got this vision of collab, but you haven't got any money and you're just, sitting here not knowing what to do. But from the vision, what's the obvious action? And then the wisdom emerges. But taking that action is really an important part here, because when you take the action, the message to your subconscious mind is, this is the part of myself that I am fostering and I'm believing in. It's like that whole story, that old story about the two wolves. Which one are you feeding? You know that story? So to me, this is like, which one are you feeding? And the feeding comes from your choice to take an action. Yeah? It's your choice to go, I'm here in my vision, and right now I need to ring somebody I don't want to ring. I don't want to do anything but ring them, yeah? Or I need to put that deposit on something, and I don't want to spend that money. That's all the resistance you talked about. But for me, in the sessions, in the work I do, there's only ever one action. Yeah, and it's really clear, and that's what I'm holding people accountable to. I feel passionate. I can feel the pain for them, and it's not about giving up their job. It's never about huge stuff. It's always just about small stuff, and people know what it is they need to do. They know. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And is there anybody else, Doris or Marisa? Is there anything else you want to ask before we finish off today?
Nothing much I want to ask, but I just want to say how inspiring it's been this morning. It's exactly what I needed to hear today.
Good.
Thank you.
Great. Wonderful. Wonderful.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, thank you very much, Anne. It was very inspiring. I took oodles of notes, and for people who are listening afterwards, we'll have all of the links on as well, and they can get in touch with you, and we'll be doing some more work together, I'm sure. Well, you're part of our network, and it's so much fun to be able to connect with people that are around the world, kind of with similar vision and what we're trying to achieve. And there's so much, we hear so much negativity in the world and the news, and to be able to see the great work that you're doing, and you're not alone. You have a large team of coaches that you're working with and so forth. So it's really, really great. Thank you so much for joining us today.
An absolute pleasure, Leanne. Absolute pleasure. Thank you, everybody. I really enjoyed it.